going to share with you today is how we actually work with our clients using sci-fi as a way to help them come up with really disruptive innovation. So Futures is an innovation house, and our job is to help our clients work with those trends and those emerging technologies that are really disrupting business today and actually creating something really disruptive and really meaningful and powerful in the market. So I'm excited to share that with you. Okay, so we heard from Erica and Jared today that we live in exponential times. You know, change today is exponential. Companies that don't realize that are on what we like to say is the linear path to doom, right? And you see companies like Kodak, which was mentioned earlier, and BlackBerry and Blockbuster really struggling. But there's some very interesting companies that are leveraging the exponential age, and you know, we just listed out a few. So it's a tremendously interesting time to be in business. Tremendously challenging, but tremendously interesting. And I think all of us in this room have a unique opportunity to create really meaningful innovation. The challenge is, how do we harness it, and what tools and techniques can we use? And that's what I'm going to cover with you today and give you some case studies as well. So yeah, we're an innovation house. We help our clients come up with the next great invention. But really, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but what we help our clients do is get grounded in what's happening, building on the great work that companies like Erica and Jared do. And then we do workshops and co-create. We disorient our clients and then reorient them and ultimately help them come up with something really meaningful, getting them off that incremental path and onto that exponential path. And the way to do that, we feel, is through storytelling. Because technology, emerging technology, these trends can be pretty hard to understand and pretty dense, when you storify that content, it becomes really powerful and people can work with it. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So does anyone have an Xbox One in the, yeah, a few of you guys? Anyone talking to it, using the voice UI at all? A few people. So yeah, I have one in my room. I talk to it a lot. My wife often says to me, who the hell are you talking to? Because I have like, and it's fun. I mean, the UI is pretty good. But just ask you guys, who do you think Xbox One's biggest competitor is in the marketplace? Or going to be in the next, say, 2 or 3 years? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Apple TV, yeah, good one. Yeah. Amazon, yeah, yeah. And you would think traditionally it would be like PlayStation, right? A gaming console competing with a gaming console. But actually, we'd like to go even further and say, you know, is it Amazon Echo? Is it Nest? Is it Google's Nest? Because basically what this device is it's a portal to a whole new home ecosystem with the Internet of Things technologies, with everything getting connected in the cloud. Really what Xbox One is, which is not a gaming console, it's a portal to a whole new marketplace. So we live in really interesting times where you have a gaming console that is now competing with a smart thermostat. And obviously this is driven by Moore's Law. I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I think the presentation before did a great job in explaining these trends. Moore's Law is driving this change. You're just seeing these amazing numbers, like the first billion tweets took 3 years, second billion tweets took 7 days. Now I think there's a billion tweets every 2 to 3 days, depending on the news. There are companies like Instagram, valued at $1 billion, only 19 months old. We saw some staggering numbers with WhatsApp. And you can just look at Google Trends data, right? 3D printing, exponential curve. Airbnb, exponential curve. Uber, literally physically disrupting transportation, not only metaphorically. And then we heard Twitch earlier today. Most people haven't heard of Twitch, but yeah, it was bought for nearly $1 billion. Just gamers watching gamers playing games. And there's also a livecoding.tv, which is coders watching coders coding. So maybe that'll get bought for $1 billion too. Personally, I couldn't think of anything worse, but hey, that's just me. So we live in amazing times. Thomas Friedman, you know, the New York Times up there journalist, he talks about the rate of change. When he sat down to write The World is Flat, this was in 2004. It's amazing to think that Facebook didn't exist in 2004. Twitter was still a sound, the cloud was still in the sky, 4G was a parking space, LinkedIn was a prison, apps were what you sent to college, and Skype was a typo. All of that happened in 6 years. So we're getting a bit of future shock, which is good, we should. So we did a little exercise earlier today. I'm going to get you guys to do another one. So more of a thought exercise as well. So imagine you have a piece of paper in front of you, and you can fold this piece of paper in half 35 times. So that each time it's doubling in size over the iteration before. After 35 folds, so it's on an exponential curve, how thick do you think this piece of paper will be? To the moon, yeah, that's a good guess. Yeah, it is. It's actually a bit more, from Earth to the moon and back again. And most people, when they respond to this, say about 5 feet. Even when I've set up the question, we've done this a lot of times, and that's because we have a problem with exponentiality. It's very hard for us to understand how 35 steps can result in over a billion iterations. And so we have this psychological bias, right? It's hard enough for corporations to come up with disruptive innovation, but it's hard for us as human beings to really comprehend what exponentiality means. When Facebook didn't exist in 2004, when these emerging technologies and these new trends are coming along and disrupting business, it's really hard for people to get their head around what that means. So has anyone heard of Dan Ariely? Yeah, great behavioral economist, right? Really interesting life story too. But he talks about these biases that we have, that we grossly overestimate what's going to happen in the short term and completely underestimate what's going to happen in the long term. So, you know, it's hard for us to think away to an exponential future. We've got these biases. But using imagination, as we heard in the session before, and being creative is a way to really help us. And even Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge, because knowledge is limited to what we know and understand here today. But when we apply our imaginations, which, by the way, is what sci-fi is, it's using imagination to creativity and technology, we're able to really get beyond the linear into the exponential. And that device is what we're using at SciFutures. So as futurists, we have this real challenge. We have this challenge helping our clients understand where they could and should be. And they have the challenge of communicating that future to everyone in the organization to get them inspired as well. And these are some of the problems we're trying to solve at SciFutures. So McKinsey did a survey of 1,000 C-suite execs and said to them, when planning for your strategy for the future, what time horizon do you use? And 44% of them, these are C-suite or board execs, 44% said they use less than 3 years. And that's because they have to. 73% of them said they would like to do more than 3 years in terms of strategic planning for their company. And 86% agreed that a longer time horizon would positively affect corporate performance. So it's not only have we got these biases, but we're also restricted, leaders are restricted in terms of how far out they can plan their strategies. So we've got this real conundrum when trying to come up with disruptive innovation. So I'm going to play you a little video by Arthur C. Clarke. Everyone knows who Arthur C. Clarke is, right? I hope. Maybe not. Okay, Arthur C. Clarke is a famous science fiction writer, kind of in his heydays in the 50s and 60s. He was also a great scientist. So this was an interview that was done with Arthur C. Clarke by the BBC in 1964. And he talks about the challenges of predicting the future.
Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation, because the prophet invariably falls between two stools. If his predictions sound at all reasonable, you can be quite sure that in 20 or at most 50 years, the progress of science and technology has made him seem ridiculously conservative. On the other hand, if by some miracle a prophet could describe the future exactly as it was going to take place, his predictions would sound so absurd, so far-fetched, that everybody would laugh him to scorn. This has proved to be true in the past, and it will undoubtedly be true, even more so, of the century to come. The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll have failed completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen. Let's start by looking at the city of the future. Some people think that it will be like this. And they're quite right. In fact, everything you see now already exists. All the materials, all the ideas, these things could be put into practice immediately. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? say, the year 2000. I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Oh, I'm not thinking of the atom bomb and the next Stone Age. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. In fact, if it proves worthwhile, almost any executive skill, any administrative skill, even any physical skill, could be made independent of distance. I am perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point, and the traditional role of the city as a meeting place for man would have ceased to make any sense. In fact, men will no longer commute, they will communicate. They won't have to travel for business anymore, they'll only travel for pleasure.
Okay, so we really love that one because Arthur C. Clarke, in 1964, says, I'm going to tell you about the future, but for me to even have any chance of getting it right, you're going to have to think I'm absolutely crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and try that anyway. And then obviously he goes and describes a future that feels quite similar to the world that we live in today. Obviously we have the benefits of hindsight. But what's profound about this is where we live today, and we're further up that exponential curve, which means things are changing even quicker. So we have to be even more bold and even more outrageous to have any chance of predicting the future in an even shorter amount of time. So these are the challenges that we're dealing with when we're going to our big Fortune 500 clients and saying, let's come up with something really disruptive. Let's make sure you're still relevant in the future. And let's get everyone behind it in the company to go on board and want to create it. So you really need these big, bold ideas. So the way to do it, and some of the tools that we've been using very successfully, is using science fiction storytelling as a way to really help generate potential and get everyone excited and understand where they could be. And we all know about the power of storytelling. Certainly this room, among many others, will probably understand that. But what's interesting is what happens to the brain under stories. This is a great book by Jonathan Gottschall. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's called The Storytelling Animal. And he says the more deeply we're cast on a story spell, the more potent its influence. In fact, fiction is more potent in changing belief than nonfiction. So what does that mean? That means that when we're told a story about an event, it's more likely to change what we believe. And actually, Ohio State University have done a study where they looked at the power of fiction versus nonfiction at changing people's behavior. And in fact, there's a significant difference in people's beliefs about themselves and the world when they were told the story rather than just the facts. But if you think about it, what do we do in a business environment, right? If we're trying to get executives to change or people inspired, we give them PowerPoint presentations. I know there's irony in that. But instead of telling a story and helping them create the story. And that's how you really need to change belief. And there's some great work, I'm not going to show now because we don't have time, on the neuroscience of storytelling. So what actually happens when to our brain and our brain chemistry when we're told stories about certain things versus just facts. So we need better stories. We need better stories in the world. We need better stories in business, and we need better innovation stories. So there's a project called the Hieroglyph Project, which is out of Arizona State University. And what they've done is they've banded together with top science fiction writers, guys like Neil Stephenson and Elizabeth Bear. And they said, enough with the negative stories, enough with the dystopia. Let's write an anthology of sci-fi stories based in science fact that can really inspire a new golden age of where we could be. And that's essentially what we're doing, but we do it for corporate innovation. sci-fi as a genre obviously is very entertaining. It's incredibly popular. It's by no means a niche genre. It's a mainstream genre. 8 of the top 10 grossing movies of all time were either sci-fi or fantasy. I think Avatar's still #1. I might have been pipped, but recently I think by Transformers, I think. But it's popular. Star Trek still has created these memes or these expectations about what technology could provide. We're seeing the tricorder inspiring things like the mobile phone, and there's an X Prize now, which is devoted to developing the tricorder. You get these iconic movies like Minority Report that inspired big data and predictive policing and virtual reality and touchscreens. And what's really interesting to us is if sci-fi is setting the memes, if sci-fi is creating the expectations passively, why don't we do that actively? Why don't we harness the potential of sci-fi and storytelling to actually work hard for our clients and to be more deliberate? What's important is we're not trying to predict the future here. That's almost impossible. What we're trying to do is we're trying to help our clients get a better sense of their future, their preferred future, and to create their future. That's what we're really trying to do. So rather than passively following, we're actively creating. Okay, so that is kind of the background. I'll talk a bit about Scifi Prototyping and actually now how we work and some of the examples that we can share. As you can imagine, a lot of the work that we do is top secret. We call it secret sci-fi because it's very instrumental to our clients' long-term strategies and disruptive innovation. So we can't share it until it comes to market. But we do have a couple case studies that I'll share with you. So actually, MIT have a sci-fi prototyping class. I hear it's very hard to get into. It's done by a guy by the name of Dan Novi. And what students do is they read science fiction and then they go into the labs and try and fabricate it and create prototypes. So that'd be a pretty fun job for an engineer. They also MIT comes out with an anthology of sci-fi stories based on the technologies and the findings that are happening in the lab. And so the science, and they hand it to sci-fi writers, and they write these fabulous stories that are speculating about where these technologies could lead. The latest one's just come out. It's really terrific. And there's a guy by the name of Brian David Johnson who works closely with us, who's written a book. He's a futurist at Intel, Sci-Fi Prototyping. So what he does at Intel is he'll talk to the engineers and he'll say, well, what goodies do you have in your lab? What are you working on? What's this chip going to do? And then he'll give it to sci-fi writers and he'll come up with stories. And that then becomes a use case. It basically becomes a way for engineers at Intel to understand the implications of where this technology could be. And in fact, Intel's a client of ours as well. So let's go back to our process just quickly. So in order to develop a science fiction prototype, you need to be educated. So building on the great work like Future Hunters do, and other companies like them, we look at the trends, emerging technologies of science, and we get our clients informed, educated, and inspired. We also do tours of Silicon Valley and Silicon Beach. And then we do a workshop where we disorient them. So we work with sci-fi writers and we get our clients to actually write science fiction stories that create utopian futures for them and dystopian futures for them. And what it does is it really gives them a better sense of how these technologies could really play out, how these trends, these consumer insights can really play out in a meaningful way for their business. And interestingly, some of the dystopian stories are actually more useful than the utopian. If we understand what's going to put us out of business, let's use that to our advantage rather than just letting it happen. And then we do reorienting, and this is the exciting part for us, is where we have an innovation lab in Burbank where we have engineers on staff and we work with outside companies. And we actually prototype, we actually build these forward-thinking innovations, disruptive innovations that our clients have ideated with us. We also work with 100 published sci-fi writers. So these are writers that write for us exclusively under NDA, and they're published. And they give us a ton of creative ideas and the human side of where technology could go. And that's a good point. The human side of what we do is so critical because when you talk to engineers, when you talk to new companies that are in love with a certain technology, they very quickly get into the techs and specs and features. But really what we're about is helping provide context, helping really translate what that technology would mean. to be really meaningful for their customers and for everyone in the organization. And that's where the storytelling helps. It provides the ecosystem. It provides the human component. And then ultimately, hopefully, our prototypes will be deployed into new and transformative ways of doing business. And I'm going to show you the Lowe's case study in a minute, which is a great example of this. Very hard to do. This is not an easy pathway because the corporate forces will fight you, and we understand that. It's part of the process. They're so used to doing things, and there's so much efficiency and inertia in the system. And we're saying, stop doing what you're doing, start looking at other things, and there is tension there. But that's okay. We just deal with it. And the way to really deal with it is through having these stories to make sure that everyone really understands what that inspirational, visceral story or narrative vision is. And some of the deliverables that we provide to get our clients there are graphic novels and animatic videos, and we've made some live action films as well. But the idea is to use sci-fi deliberately and bring to life where they could be. So let's look at a couple case studies that we can share. So future of bottled water. This was an interesting for Aquafina for Pepsi. This is actually Pepsi's slide. They came to us and said, we understand that plastic is creating issues for us and issues for the environment. Help us reimagine what the future of bottled water could be. So going through our process, obviously you can't read this, but we ground them in the emerging technologies that could be interesting. Some are directly related to bottled water and packaging, but some are peripherally related. We look at trends, so there's water ADMs in India. Look at things like wearables and biometrics. Obviously, the Internet of Things is a big deal. And then we work with our sci-fi writers and our clients to co-create different stories, and the final story that we come up with effectively is their innovation strategy. And in some cases, their business strategy. And in this case, the strategy that Pepsi really liked was this idea of bottled water as a retail delivery mechanism in third world countries and developing countries, where everyone has a smart bottle. That bottle's integrated to your biometrics and your wearable clothing, your smart clothing. And what it's able to do is analyze what you need specifically based upon time of day, what's in your calendar, how you're feeling, any health issues, and your hydration needs. And then you go into the retail store and you can actually get your own water. And this woman, Maria, in the story has a relationship, so it has this nice narrative arc. And that narrative arc is really important. It pulls people into the world. They suspend disbelief, and it gets them really engaged with the content. Pepsi haven't launched this. I'm not sure if they will, but it was a great concept for them. Here's another example that Lowe's, we did for Lowe's. Has anyone heard of the Hollow Room? Yeah, 3 or 4 hands. So Lowe's came to us about quite a while ago, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and said, what is the future of home improvement? So at the time, Oculus Rift was, I know it's a great photo. Is anyone, who hasn't put on an Oculus Rift? Yeah, recommend it, it's pretty cool. And the Crescent Bay, the latest version is just absolutely mind-blowing. But yeah, Oculus was still on Kickstarter, and VR was nowhere near what it is today. But we could tell it was on the S-curve. We could tell that it was about to go really big. So we said, look, let's look at Oculus, let's look at augmented reality and heads-up displays. And then working with our client, we put together a bunch of narratives. This was the one that actually resonated, of couples going through a home renovation experience. And it's a great category because there's a ton of drama, natural drama and tension. The big insight for Lowe's is that couples have a very hard time visualizing, or people have a very hard time visualizing what a renovation project could look like once they've done it. It's really hard. But it's very hard for them to communicate that to each other. You might have an idea of what you like, but you won't be able to communicate it. And that inability to visualize actually creates tremendous stress and inertia. And actually, they quantified it. It's worth billions of dollars in sales, in lost sales for Lowe's. So we took that insight and we created a narrative using the same kind of stereotypes and insights that Lowe's customers go through. But we solved it using technology. And in this case, the idea was, in the future, couples will be able to go in, stand in the exact bathroom that they're in, or living room or kitchen, and using VR, they'll be able to change out and modify. Let's try to get back to the... yeah, this was the original image that we drew up for them. three and a half, 4 years ago, that you'd be able to change out the features and specifications of your room in real time, and then with a flick of the wrist, it could be delivered the next day. That was sci-fi at the time. It was really kind of hard to believe, but in a short matter of time, it's become a reality. So we took that original story, we went to prototyping, we did quite a few ranges of prototypes, and then we started with AR, and then this image, the second to last image, was two AR Holoroom stores that they set up in Canada. And then just recently, Lowe's have now rolled this out, and they've got it in 19 stores, but they've gone straight to VR because you don't need these big AR footprints anymore. So the point I'm trying to make is what was science fiction in a very conservative company became science fact, and they've deployed it. And we think that that storytelling and that sci-fi prototyping helped Lowe's executives understand the benefits of these emerging technologies before they were ready, before it was immediately obvious. They really understood the consumer benefit and the need and how it could change their business. So that was a great case study. We won an award for that, the Augie Awards, and we're finalists at CES. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to show this video. But it's some of the work that we're doing for Visa, where we're helping them reimagine the future of payments, the future of commerce. And what we're creating is experiential spaces for them to bring in their clients and really understand things like Bitcoin and technologies of the future, and smart ATMs, and connected cars, and what IoT ecosystem and VR means for the payment space. So we're building this immersive experience for them. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of time for questions, but I want to leave you with this quote. If what you are doing is not seen by some people as science fiction, it's probably not transformative enough, and that's from Sergey Brin from Google. And we really, truly believe that. Great. Thank you. I'll ask Scott, my partner, to join us up on stage for questions. Scott's our CTO, but any questions before we move on? Okay, one in the back.
What you're thinking is about some of the recent books, from Nate Silver to something that was just published recently about sort of the whole world of prediction and improving predictive technology and predictive science, as it were.
Yeah. So do you mean from an AI point of view and big data analysis?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's a science that is only going to get better. Some of the stuff that's happening with the Watson project is really, really interesting. I think we're still in the early days. But yeah, that science is phenomenal. I think companies like Amazon that have real data that are able to analyze it, you don't really have to understand why it happens. You just have to know predictions happen. And that I find interesting. But I think it's in its infancy still. It's really interesting. A question?
Not a question. I'm here from GE Digital, which was formerly GE Software, and we're doing that for the industrial internet. So if you want to talk to me about what we're doing, I'm here.
Perfect. All right. Any others? Oh.
You said that you quoted, I think you attributed it to Dan Ariely, that the future is wildly overemphasized in the near term and underemphasized in the long term. If that's the case, why are businesses so reluctant to get with these future visions? Wouldn't it be the opposite?
So let me understand your question. So human beings have a hard time. We grossly overestimate what's going to happen in the short term, but underestimate what's going to happen in the long term. Yeah, I think there's a contradiction there. I think you're right. I think one is, the cognitive biases that we have just naturally. But I think it's such a good question. Why do businesses struggle with coming up with really disruptive innovation? And I mean, if you've worked with these big companies, it's really hard for them because they have processes, they have incentive plans, they have lack of vision. Some of them are fear-based, they're afraid. So you have all those forces working against them. The point we're trying to make is that by telling the story, it's a lot easier for them to imagine and connect with the content rather than trying to analyze their way through it. But yeah, Scott.
A big part of that is also they need to manage to their quarters, right? So they have a financial incentive to sort of stay on track. So the idea that we can provide them with collateral and information that they can share amongst the C-suite to provide them with information on a longer-term vision allows them to set aside budget that might provide them with a 2, 3, 4-year project plan versus trying to manage to the quarters, which is really a problem for these large organizations.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great metaphor, and it's true. I mean, we like to say the white blood cells come out, in the organization when you start to stir things up, and that's good. It's part of the process. So I think I'm out of time, but thank you very, very much. Hope you have a great conference. Thank you.